Okay, so what I'm going to do is go over what all these words mean, sort of in the process of giving you a little talk about it. So as I talk, you'll figure out what all the words' definitions were. But I also gave you a little sheet like this. Each one should have one of these. And use your pencil to fill in what we go over, and that'll be your way of summarizing all these definitions and putting them in a way that's a little more manageable than this giant pile of matching definitions. Okay? Okay, so we're going to start with this. This is how your clay should look when you come in and you've had a bit of clay that you're working on. This is how it will be stored. It'll be in a plastic bag. There was a spray bottle of water, and you twist it so that not up here, but down here so that no air can get in, right? You have this little tight so that it's completely safe from air. That's how your clay should look when you come in. And you get it out. Okay. It should feel nice and wet. It should feel easy to squeeze, and very pliable. Now I'm going to ask you some chemistry questions. Is this a solid, a liquid, or a gas? Solid. Solid, very good. It is a mixture, a pure substance, or a solution. You have to know the definitions of those things. What's a solution? So an example of a solution is like lemonade with sugar in it. The sugar gets all dissolved and it's in there, but it's dissolved. You'd have to chemically separate it back out, right? What's a pure substance?
Like element.
Yeah, like nothing in it but itself, just a single element, like feldspar or iron or something. It's definitely not a pure element. Is it a mixture? What's the definition of a mixture? Okay, the stuff is all mixed together, mixture, okay? But I could separate it out without any chemical processes. This is a mixture. If I threw this in a bucket of water, when I come in tomorrow, all the dirt will be settled to the bottom and the water will be settled to the top, and I will separate all the little pieces back out of itself. So this is a mixture. How plastic is it? Plastic is the word that we're going to use for flexibility that clay has. So number 3 on your stages of clay sheet is plasticity, and that's also one of the words from your vocabulary list, so you can see how to spell it. Plasticity, plasticity. Okay. Is this still pretty plastic? Have a lot of plasticity? Pretty moldable? I can kind of do whatever I want. It's not cracking, right? I can mash it, bend it, whatever, it's not cracking. Very high plasticity. That's because there's a lot of water in it. And the molecules are kind of like spread out, and they're not all bumped up against each other so they can wiggle around more because there's water molecules in between. All right, now, I have taken some of this and rolled it out, and I left it dry overnight, slightly covered, not completely out in the air, but slightly. And that's what this is. Is this, what's happened to the clay because I left it out? It dried. In fact, about 75% of the water has evaporated out. Now when the water goes away, what happens to the molecules are left? They gotta get closer and closer together, right? Do you think this is smaller, the same size as, or larger than the original? Smaller, because the molecules of water went out and all the rest of the molecules went and got closer together, so it got smaller, shrunk. Just like things do when they dry out. In terms of plasticity, is it still plastic? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Could I crank on it or would it crack apart? It would crack apart. So yeah, kind of plastic, but not like the original was, right? Because it's lost so much water, those molecules are closer together. They don't have the flexibility that they had before. So this is actually called leather hard clay, and that's number 4 under your stages of clay. Okay. Clay with only about 25% of the water left in it, and it feels like leather, and that's why it's called leather hard. This is perfect for slab building because this would stand up on its own, wouldn't it? If this were fresh clay, like my ball of clay that I just showed you, this would flop over, it wouldn't stand up. So if I'm making a slab vessel like this, This is what I need, so it has the stability to stand up, but I can still bend it around in a half circle if I want to. That's really important. So this is leather hard. It's got some plasticity to it, not a lot, smaller than the original. Is this still a mixture? Did I do anything chemical to it? No, the water just evaporated through natural processes. So this is still a mixture. I could throw this in the recycle bin, come in tomorrow, the dirt would be settled on the bottom, all the water would be up the top, and I could mold it back into a ball of clay, just like this, all over again. Completely recyclable. That saves us so much money you can't imagine. That we can just keep reusing the edges, the scraps, all that stuff over and over again. Okay, but what if I didn't protect this from the air and all of the water went completely out of it? It would look like this. Okay, is this still a mixture? Yeah, still didn't chemically change it, but all the water has gone out of it. 0 water left in it. This is called bone dry. So this is number 5. How plastic or wiggly is this bone dry clay? If I try to bend it, what happens?
Broken.
Yes, 0 flexibility, 0. That means that this is the most fragile moment of your clay. So once you've constructed a pot and it sits and sits and sits, it was pretty rugged and could put up with some moving around at first, right? But after it sits and it has become completely bone dry like this, now it is really, really fragile, and you better hope somebody doesn't bump it, somebody doesn't try and knock it up against something else. This is when the handles fall off, when the feet fall off, when the ears fall off, whatever you're making, because it's really fragile. It can't be touched, it can't be bumped, because now it's a heck of a lot more fragile than it was when you started. So that's really important to think about. Okay, bone dry, but it's still a mixture, so I could still, even if I made my pot, put it on the shelf, it got completely bone dry, if I hated it, I could still throw it in the recycle bin, nothing lost except for my time. But I can still recycle it. 0 water left. And again, smaller or larger than the original? Much smaller, because all the water went out of it, so now it shrunk actually a lot. The next step in clay building is to put something in the kiln or fire it. That first firing is called the bisque firing, and under your corner on the right that says firing terms, we can talk about some of those. So number 5 under firing terms is firing. That's cooking the pots at a high temperature. The first time I do that, and I do it in a kiln, that's actually number 1, the big octagonal shaped object that's in my second room over there. That's what I do it in. So the first time I fire it, it's called bisque fired. And that's number 6, just like lobster bisque, B-I-S-Q-U-E. It's got this pink color to it.
Which number was that?
That's number 6 on the upper left-hand corner stages of clay. It's been fired 1 time. Okay, and that's bisque firing. It is not yet waterproof, because even though I fired it, the bisque firing is only at a kind of a lower temperature, so the molecules did not get completely close together. This is still not waterproof. It's considered porous. Water would still seep into the pores. So that's why I wouldn't want to use this for food. What if I ate soup or tea or something in this, and all those little bits of tea and soup went in those pores and I couldn't completely clean it after I was done using it? That's gross. So you wouldn't want to use this for food because it's not waterproof. Is this still a mixture?
Yeah.
The heat has caused the chemical change. The molecules have now rearranged themselves and made a different substance. So in that process, in most chemical processes where things actually become rearranged molecularly, what is usually one of the byproducts that's given off? Energy is going to be used to heat those molecules, and that's what's causing them to change. But in this case, gases are given off. That's why in the kiln I have a very powerful ventilation system, and the switches on the outside, that's for the fan. And if you ever walk by and the fan is running, please don't turn it off. That means I'm firing and I'm sucking all those harmful gases out of the kiln room so they don't come out here and we don't breathe them. They wouldn't make you pass out immediately or something, but they aren't good over long term to breathe, and sometimes that could set the smoke alarm off because the alarm is set to detect ions and not actual smoke, and these chemicals are ions in the air. So that's what the fan is for. If you hear it running, just let it run, because we're sucking all those gases out as it changed. Because a chemical change has taken place, is this still a mixture? No. I can throw this in the water and 6 months from now, it'll still look exactly like this. It will have soaked up the water, but it still won't change its shape. It'll never go back to being the mixture. Once you have something that's in bisqueware, it's done. Game over. It is now a loss if you don't like it or don't want it. So it's only at this stage where you have a chance to make changes and make things better. You're not going to pull out a piece of bisqueware and be like, oh, I think I really need to sand that down quite a bit more because it doesn't look good. You can sand it a little bit, but you shouldn't because you shouldn't breathe the silica. But it's not, you can't really change it. This is your opportunity. Before it even goes in the kiln, get those rough edges smoothed out, get it the way that you want it, because once it's like this, it's too late. And now it's a complete, the game is over. Now, I could fire it again. I could paint it with glaze and fire it again, and it'll come out like this. You can see the difference in the color. This one's like more brown and this one's more pink, right? This is the glaze firing. Glaze is one of your words. This is an example of a bottle of glaze, okay? This is one of the most expensive things we have in the studio. It is ground up glass and water, so it's not gonna stain your clothes. If I took ground up glass and sprinkled on your sweatshirt, that's not gonna stain it, right? The only exception to that is if the things that make it the color, like sometimes red and sometimes a black, I have one black one that stains, those chemicals will stain your clothes. So for example, if you have iron in your water and your sink drips slowly, or your washing machine sometimes, what color will it eventually turn if you have a lot of iron in your water? Brown or orange, right? So if you have glaze with iron in it and you get it on your white t-shirt, you might have a little yellow or orange stain left over. Same thing with like if you have copper pipes and that drip happens in your sink, that's happening in my bathroom right now, what color spot does that eventually create?
Like a brownish.
Green, blue. Copper oxidizes green, blue. So if you have copper in your glaze, that can sometimes cause a stain on your clothes as well. But something like this generally will not. The other thing is this glaze was used right here, 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 here. What color is it?
Blue.
Blue. What color is the glaze?
Not blue.
Not blue. Never trust the color of the glaze. You have to trust the color on the front of the bottle, which is usually wrong. But I also have a test tile over there which shows you exactly what it looks like when it comes out of the kiln, so you'll know. Never go by the color in there or you'll be sadly mistaken when it comes out of the kiln. Completely unpredictable from its color. Okay, so let's talk about the types of clay that's out there. We already sort of covered the history of pottery yesterday. We talked about it was an ancient art form way back, even in the Neolithic times. But that's when people were sort of transitioning from being like nomadic hunter-gatherers and to actually living in communities and villages, and clay bricks and that kind of, and water vessels to help carry their water from, stuff like that helped with that transition. The Greeks are kind of credited with making pottery an art form, and potters were known as craftsmen though, and not artists, which is a distinction we've been fighting kind of ever since. They had a lot of different colors they were able to produce in their glazes through pot ash and some other additives. They had the wheels were developed as a slow wheel in 3000 BC, and then later on in Europe and Asia they had the fast wheel, which made it possible to mass produce pots. We talked about that with the Roman Empire. And we also talked about all the awesome stuff that was happening with pottery in China. In 600 AD, that's when they first began to discover porcelain and kaolin clay, which was able to make this porcelain pottery that was very beautiful, but also very fragile. So let's sort of talk about from the bottom level up. Regular, sort of the lowest firing, most basic kind of clay. So this is under types of clay. Number one is earthenware. Earthenware clay is the kind that we were talking about in Central America, often used sometimes in Mexico as well. Originally, it's used everywhere now, but it's very porous and it never becomes waterproof. So even though you fire it as high as you want, those molecules never fully get close together. There's always a little bit of space so the water can soak in, and that's why it's used for flower pots. That's why the little flower pot by number one, because that's good for a flower pot. It kind of soaks the water in, it lets it distribute a little more slowly into the earth around the roots, and that's all good. My mom actually had an earthenware like roasting pan that was designed to soak the juices of the meat into the pores, and that was supposed to enhance the flavor and blah blah blah. I think she used it like 3 times, but not completely waterproof. It is porous. It also fires at a low temperature, and it's usually an orange or brown color, or like an ochre color. We'll talk about that later. Okay, next is stoneware clay. That's the kind of clay that you're using that we talked about as being discovered in Germany and used primarily in Germany. It's fired at much higher temperatures, and when you fire it high enough, it vitrifies. Vitrification is when you fire something so hot that it becomes absolutely stuck together with those molecules, and now it's waterproof. You don't even have to glaze it if you don't want to. I mean, you can because it's pretty, but you don't have to because it'll be waterproof without it. Vitrification is number 2 under your firing terms, and it's also lying there in front of you if you want to know how to spell it, but vitrification, vitrification. It means to fire something high enough that it actually becomes waterproof. Okay, vitrification. Really wonderful. It does chip, but it's often used for practical uses like plates, bowls, vases, and that's what we're going to be using because most of the things that we make are for eating and putting stuff in. So it's good for us to use stoneware. It's also a little more sophisticated. It's a little less grammar schoolish than some of the low fire like school clays, which are a little more less sophisticated. The third type of clay is called kaolin clay, and it's a white clay found in China and Japan in the Far East. And it's the kind of clay that everybody else wanted. That's like they were talking in the Middle East, so they tried to imitate it by doing their own kind of different glaze treatment because everybody wants this kaolin clay. Very, very fine and very, very powdery, and it's used to make porcelain. That's number 3, Kaolin, and that's why there's a little teacup next to it, because fine porcelain and fine china is made from kaolin clay. You'll also, because it's so fine, it's also used in soaps, scrubs, or like a facial mask. If you go to Marshall's and you buy a facial mask, it's probably got kaolin clay in it because it sucks all the impurities out of your skin. Now, all clay is going to suck the oils out of your skin. Your hands are going to start to look like mine. You might want to keep some lotion in your bag all the time because when you get done with pottery class, your hand's going to get dried out. I have 4 periods of pottery, so I get those little splits in my fingers, from being really dry, and working man's hands doesn't really work at all. So it does take a toll on your skin. So make sure that you're prepared for that if you have dry skin. Now you can add stuff to clay, especially like to stoneware, that will make it stronger, make it react differently, make it fire a little differently. If you don't want to have it such a high temperature to fire, you could add stuff to it. If I'm making something really big and I want it to be like a tougher, heavier, kind of more durable clay, I could add stuff to it. And that stuff is called grog. G-R-O-G is number 4. Grog can be anything from little rocks to different kinds of ash to different kinds of gravel or sand, anything like that to make it a little more heavy duty. If you ever go like walking in the woods and you see a stream, have you ever looked in and seen like a weird streak of gray dirt in the middle of the clay? That in the middle of the stream, that's clay. We have natural clay in our area. If you scooped some of that out and made it into a pot and tried to fire it, it would probably blow up because it probably has little bits of snail shells, a frog leg, some dirt. It has other stuff in it that's not really going to be pure clay, and that's going to cause it to blow up when the high heat hits it because it's not sifted out. The kind that we use is taken out of the ground also, but then it's sifted through a bunch of very fine mesh filters to get rid of all those impurities. So that's how clay is produced and mined. All right, let's talk about the methods for building in the upper right-hand corner. If I take clay and I make a snake out of it by rolling snakes, number 1 in the upper corner, what's that? These are probably the ones you had done. Yeah, coiling. You guys all know these from your videos you watched at the beginning. If I have a ball of clay that I stick my thumb in and I'm starting to pinch it around the outside, that's a pinch pot, so that's number 2. And if I take a roller and I turn clay into a flat sheet that I then use to build on, that was called slabs. Very good. So I'm going to do a little slab stuff for you here as the part of the demonstration. Okay. If I put it on a wheel and spin it around really fast, that's called throwing. Now, no actual throwing of pottery ever occurs in the pottery room, or you're in big trouble. Sometimes it comes off of the wheel and flies across the room, but you won't actually be throwing it. That's just a word that they use to make a pot on the wheel, which is kind of unfortunate since most people think of throwing clay. When I want to join 2 pieces of clay together, I use a process called slipping and scoring. Very good. You remember that from the video too. Slipping and scoring is where you scratch it with a tool and then you add some slip. So I'm going to do a little slipping and scoring for you. Okay. So to slip and score, I'm using my leather hard clay, which is 75% dry, and I'm going to use little scratch marks to prepare the clay for joining. In general, when you're joining clay, wetter is better because it allows the molecules to kind of separate and then re-goo back together a little bit, and you want that. The way that these score marks are working, I have them parallel and next to each other. I'm sure living in Hughesville, PA, you've all loaded and stacked wood in your life, right? Okay. When you put the logs in the log pile, they're like this. When you put the next log on, it settles into the ridges between the other ones, right? That's exactly what's happening with slipping and scoring. All these little ridges I'm making are like the logs in the log pile. Then I'm going to use my slip, which is like glue. It's no fancier than clay and water mixed together to make a nice fine mud. Use my glue. I'm going to put my slab, have those little logs match up perfectly, and then I'm going to push. What should I see squeezing out the side? Slip. If I don't, I'm not pushing hard enough. So I should see it slipping out. I'm still not done. If I quit here, it might work, but you want to make sure that it works so you don't lose all your pots. And now I have to blend. So I don't know if you can see, but I'm seriously pushing a chunk of clay off of the one piece and onto the other. I don't want to just sort of whisk around and kind of smear it with my finger. I want actual clay transfer. You can see my dig marks on there, right? You want to be aggressive about it. Now, once I get it all smooshed, now I can make it pretty by smoothing it with my finger. And you'd want to do that for craftsmanship, obviously. You don't want those giant dig marks all over the place. So I'm going to smooth it, make it look nice so that that seam is beautifully blended. Now, to make sure that I have a nice, good join, I'm going to need to put a little clay snake in there. So I would take a little baby coil. I could roll it or I could cut off another slab, something like that, put more score marks in it. Put score marks where I'm going to attach it there. I'm just going to do a little corner of it here to show you. Get my slip, put it in there, get my snake in there, and I'm going to really, again, blend and mash so that it's completely smooth and I have a nice, I can't see where the edges of my snake are anymore, and I have a nice complete join. That gives that stability and it makes it waterproof, and that's how you can be sure your joints are properly attached. So that's a really important process, that's slipping and scoring. Now, let's say I wanted to add a piece and I was like, you know what? I want to add this on there. So I'd slip and score, right?
I don't think it's working.
Why won't it work?
Because it's bone dry.
What's wrong with a piece of bone dry clay?
It has water in it, so.
It has no water in it, so what's it going to do? Is it going to shrink?
No,
It already shrunk. It
Yeah,
shrunk all it can. There's no more water left in it.
it can't shrink anymore.
But, does this one still have water in it?
Yes.
So this one's going to shrink, but this one's not. So what'll happen?
It'll fall off.
They're going to crack apart. Okay, this is the most important thing that I'll probably tell you today. You have to put like with like. If these aren't the same dryness, they'll start to crack apart and crack off. You can never, it's like a marriage. The more alike the people are, sometimes the better they can hang out together. This will never stay on here because this is going to start shrinking. This one won't shrink at all, and it'll pull away from it. No matter how much slip and score I use, no matter what I do. It's too late if you have a piece like this. So that is one of the reasons why when you start building, you're going to have the pieces that you're working with. Save the rest of it off to the side because it's the same dryness. So if you do need to do something else, you grab a piece from this already same level of dryness blob that you have as a spare blob, and you can build with that. So it's always good to keep a little bit left over so that you have something that's the same dryness to use to do whatever else you feel like doing. Oh, I forgot a handle, I need a coil, I need a whatever. At least you know this is the same, and you're not going to have a disaster like you would if you tried to attach this. Okay. I have on occasion been able to fix bone dry pots with a near surgical precision procedure that involves vinegar, but hopefully you won't ever come to that kind of disaster. Okay, so that's all of our methods of building and the good explanation of how to join leather, how to join pieces. Let's go into the firing terms. So number one under the firing terms was what? What's the place where I put the pots to fire them? Kiln, good. It's like this. It has heating coils that go around the outside that is all electric. In the old days, of course, they fed them with little sticks of wood, and they knew that 8 sticks in this corner made it 8 degrees higher over here, but 4 degrees, and they were able to control all of that, which seems crazy to me. And I'd much rather push a button and be like 2167, thank you, go. But they were doing with little sticks of wood and managing the temperature all the time. Now, before, my kiln has a giant electric control panel that I just input what I want it to do and it goes. But before we had that, we had this. This is a cone pack, and these are pyrometric cones. So for number 3, you're gonna write cones. They're pyrometric cones. Have you heard of a pyromaniac? What's a pyromaniac?
Someone who likes
Someone likes to burn things because pyro means fire. A pyrometric cone is a cone that is sensitive to different firing temperatures, and it's designed to melt at a certain temperature. So this is designed to melt when it gets to 2120. So when this bends over, I'll know I'm at 2120. So how do I look in the kiln, you ask? There's a little hole in the side of every kiln with a plug in it, a cement fire brick plug. And I can take out that plug and peer in while the kiln is running. It's literally like looking into the mouth of hell. You can barely see anything. There's red stuff swirling all over the place, and you're like, where are the cones? You're actually supposed to wear eye protection when you do that because the infrared things will burn your retina. I didn't know that, so I've looked into my kiln at home a couple of times. Luckily, it probably wasn't very hot. And I can still see, which is a miracle. But you look at your cones, and if they're bent, then you know you're at the temperature you want it to be. And usually use 2. One that's almost where you want it, and then one where you want it. That way you got the get ready cone going, and once it goes, you know you're almost ready to look at the other one, and it won't be a big surprise. You can predict when that's going to go because it's very specific, and you want to get it out of there on time. So that's what we used before we had electric control panels. And every now and then I'll still throw one of these in the kiln just to double check the temperature because my electronics could be going bad, and I would never know, right? So I have to have some way of backup checking, and that's what these are for. You'll see some of these in there. And again, the difference in color. Which firing was this probably?
Bisque.
This, because this is pretty pink colored, and this was the final glaze firing because it turned kind of brown. Now, if you see a pot in the kiln room that's not pink, please don't glaze it. First of all, it'll be on the wrong shelf. It'll be on where the greenware pots go because it has never been fired. I've had 2 students last semester who glazed their greenware pots, and we were like, like what? I ended up putting them in the bisque firing, and they came out, but the colors are not what you wanted, and it's not the ideal scenario. Don't forget, you have to wait till it's bisque fired before you can glaze it. Don't try and glaze your greenware. Okay. Now, I have shelves in the kiln, and to make them adjustable, I use what's called kiln furniture, and it's basically a bunch of these little fire brick chimneys, and I set them around like in a semicircle, and then I can put my next giant fire brick shelf on top of there, put a bunch of pots, put a couple more chimneys, put another layer, and I can build all different movable layers. So some of these are short, some of these are tall. So if you have a tall pot, I can make a tall shelf area. I can make short shelves. I can do half a shelf. There's a lot of flexibility. This allows me to pack my kiln really tight. So number 4 is kiln furniture. I also have little like prongs that I can set things up on. I have little wires, things I can hang beads on. There's all kinds of kiln furniture that you can use. And for number 5, what's the process of cooking pots at a high temperature called? Firing. We've been using that term all along, so you guys already know it. Now the one thing I see that I missed was is number 6 under stuff we do to clay, right? All right, so back to my little pot that I'm building. Let's say I want to make some decorations in it. I have a couple of choices. I can carve decorations in, and if I do that, that is called incising, okay? Now, let's say I want to carve a flower, and I go like this with this pointy tool. First of all, you're not even supposed to have this pointy tool in your caddy because some students thought it was really fun to poke holes in my squirt bottles and let them leak all over the table. So these aren't in your caddy anymore. Also, you can do what you do with this with every other tool in you have a bunch of tools to do the same thing with. I have a couple of them for wheel work because I need them for wheel work, and they're always in my caddy. This is my very sophisticated and beautiful caddy. That's where they're gonna stay. If for some reason you need to use it, ask me, and then when you're done, put it back in here. Don't make me search all over the pottery studio for it. So if I start scribbling in it like this, I won't fire this for you for a couple of reasons. First of all, because when you scratch something with this, it makes a deep, skinny ditch, which means the glaze is never gonna get in there all the way. The glaze is either gonna skim over the top of it and you won't even see your mark, or it's not gonna get in there and you'll have an empty clay mark. The other thing that this happens, I don't know if you can see, but it makes little clay boogers that are kind of like gooed up and all over the outside of it. And that's going to make a really sharp, rough edge on your pot, which you don't want. So you never use a tool like this to write something or draw something in your clay. You need a tool like this. Every caddy has a couple of them, but they have a fatter tip that's sort of at an angle. And if I go over my lines with that, it makes it like a ditch and not a scratch. So now I have a wider space for the glaze to go in there. It's going to make a much neater decoration. It doesn't make the clay boogers like the scratchy tool, the pin tool does. A much more satisfactory result. Okay. So you're going to use a tool like this if you have the need to carve in. Now let me caution you about words. If you try to free write with this tool, it's going to look like a kindergartner did it. And I really like 3 kids in the whole school that can probably pull that off and make it look professional. You probably aren't one of them. It'll look like a kindergartner did it. So go to Microsoft Word, print out whatever you want to say in the font that you want to say it. Microsoft Word also manages kern, K-E-R-N, which is how close the words are squished together or how far apart they are, and it'll look professional, look nice. We'll find a way to transfer that word onto your pottery through a carbon paper or some other transfer method so you can trace that once we get it on there. Like I have some people that did like the Penn State logo on a mug and stuff like that, and you wanna get that off the computer and we'll transfer it on there. Don't try and freehand that. The other thing you can do with words is I have a box of alphabet letters, literally from like alphabet soup, and you can pick out the letters that you want. You just push them in. They stay in there. By the second day that you come in, they've absorbed the moisture out of the clay and they grow like a 1/4 inch of mold, like hairy mold. It's really fun. But when we put them in the kiln, they just burn off. They just incinerate. And what's left behind is the impression of the letter that's perfect, like typeface, capitals all the way across. So, and they're kind of nice and small, so they fit like on a handle or across the rim of your pot. They're pretty. So that would be number 6, carving in. The second one in number 6. The first one in number 6 would be pushing something in, and that's called impressing a design. So I have a really great collection of stamps that you can use where you push in, you got a support from behind. This one is another example. It's like a spiral square. Oh, put that guy there, really push. But I have a whole bunch of stamps. So a lot of what we do texture-wise is made from these stamps, and there's so many, I can't even like summarize them for you. I have big stamps, little stamps, Celtic knots, swirls, suns, stars, flowers, butterflies, you name it. So always use the stamps to get a nice, perfectly even and professional looking result. Okay, so that's how you put decorations into or texture into your piece. Anything else I missed from your list? You have everything filled in?
Yeah.
All right, any questions about joining pieces of pottery or wetness, dryness? Now you know all about what molecules do in the kiln, right? Question with us.
For the stages of clay 1 and 2.
1 and 2. Okay, so something that's not fired, it's not even a pot yet, it's this. This is clay. Kind of too obvious to even, I guess, worry about, but clay. But once I turn it into a pot, and it hasn't been fired yet, it looks like this. This is greenware. G-R-E-E-N, ware. Why does it have the big caution symbol by greenware in number 2? Because once all the water goes out of it, and it's bone dry, it's so fragile. This is the one that has no plasticity left in it because all the water has gone out of it. I bumped this, I bumped somebody's handle, I bumped the ear of their cat pot or whatever, it's gonna fall right off in the kiln. When I load the kiln, it's awful. I'm like, each piece goes in. I've had pieces that were so fragile, I'm like, I'm not touching that, you put it in the kiln. I make them put it in the kiln because I don't wanna break it. It's the most fragile point is greenware, and that's also the shelf you do not want to touch anything on because that's, if your elbow bumps something, your pinky finger bumps something, you'll break it. That's greenware. And did you say number 7 under what? Stuff we do to glaze?
Yeah.
That's glazing. That's supposed to be a paintbrush painting the glaze on. Anything else that I missed? Yes. Oh, sorry. The kidney-shaped thing in the middle is this little guy. He's so cool. You can make him out of old credit cards or hotel keys or whatever. And he's for making clay surfaces smooth, and it's called a rib. It's, even though it looks like it should be called a kidney bean, but it's called a rib because actually it was made of bone, rib bones from old ancient saber-toothed tigers or whatever they were killing back then. I don't know. So that's your rib. Very good. Way to catch me on the sheet. Anything else? Okay, you only have 1 minute left. So if you would please carefully put all of your vocabulary words back in the envelopes, don't mix them up, and you can keep the sheets yourself. They're for you, so you have a reference.